This is HowieDoinIt, a podcast about resilience. Join me, your host, Howie Craw, as I explore the true stories of those who have been knocked down by life's biggest challenges and despite insurmountable odds, went on to achieve great success in both life and business. Become a master of resilience, and you'll see that anything is possible. Let's do this. Hey everyone, welcome back to the HowieDoinIt show. I'm your host, Howie Craw. My guest today is Tamsin Astor. Tamsin is a speaker, coach, and author of the top-selling book, Force of Habit: Unleash Your Power by Developing Great Habits. She has a Ph.D. in neuroscience and psychology and combines her Western science training with the wisdom of Eastern practices, including meditation, Ayurveda, and yoga to help people organize their habits, create their vision, and transform their mindset so that they have time for what they need and want to do. Tamsin helps time-strapped, overwhelmed, and overcommitted high achievers make more room in their lives for fun, while also taking care of business. She is a strong advocate of designing a life that works for you rather than trying to fit yourself into a mold created by someone else. In addition to her coaching and consulting practice, Dr. Astor is an avid traveler and foodie who has traveled with her 3 kids to Brazil, France, England, Amsterdam, Japan, Costa Rica, and beyond, because she believes that travel helps breed tolerance and cultivates gratitude and reflection as you observe how other cultures operate and make choices. Tamsin, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
I am too, and if my ears are working right, you do not have a New York accent, and it's pretty obvious you didn't grow up in the South. Let's start from the beginning. Where did you grow up, and how did you make your way across the pond?
I grew up in central London. My parents moved to Notting Hill in the 1970s when it was a kind of funky, evolving Afro-Caribbean neighborhood. I did my Ph.D. at the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience in London, where I met my then husband, and he and I got postdoctoral fellowships at Washington University in St. Louis. So in 2002, he and I decided we'd move to the U.S. for 2 years and then go back to London. We left our place in London on the rental market, and we thought, all right, let's start a couple of years living in the U.S. and then go home. And we really enjoyed living in the Midwest in St. Louis. It was, initially we found it strange that people remembered how we took our coffee in the local coffee shop, because that's not really how it works in London.
Right.
And we could afford to buy a house. So we bought a house with a garden, which was very exciting. If you come from central London, you generally don't have a garden. And we had 2 boys there. And then we moved to Cleveland in 2007 when he got a tenure-track job at Case Western Reserve University, at which point I jumped ship from academia and branched out on my own.
Wow, that's pretty good. St. Louis to Cleveland, and I know Case Western Spartan, so I know that all so well. Now, on this show here, we talk a lot about resilience and how we all navigate difficult moments. Basically, how we do life. Now, you experienced several difficult moments after you arrived. If you don't mind, please share those with us.
Sure. So, firstly, there's the strange business of being an immigrant, which people don't really give a lot of weight to if you come from a culture that looks and sounds much like America, but it is very different, and that was, required some resilience. But the really big one that really sort of hit me square in the face was in the fall of 2008, when the world was starting to implode with the financial crisis. My personal world started to implode when my younger son, who is now my middle child, was diagnosed with cancer when he was 2 years old.
That had to be so difficult. How did you get through it?
So when something like that happens, you have to face the reality, right? And we come from a generation where we don't expect to lose our children. But in the not too recent past, most people would expect to lose a number of children. So I dove deep into figuring out what I could do to support him, my then husband, and my 4-year-old son, and support myself through that. And that's really how I ended up creating the life and business I have today, because I struggled to prioritize my own needs. And as I struggled, I got sick. I had insomnia. I had food allergies. I had hives. I, just was not feeling really deeply well. And the doctors here were just going, I don't know, maybe take a sleeping pill if you can't sleep. I don't know, if you're not digesting food, maybe change your diet. Nothing was really concrete, and it seemed to be more about suppressing symptoms. And that was when I discovered Ayurveda, which is the sister science to yoga and literally means the science of life. And when I started studying Ayurveda and blending it with my studies of Buddhism, which are largely focused on a number of different things, largely focused, the bit that I really focused on Buddhism was getting comfortable talking about death, getting comfortable working with my own mind, and figuring out how I could serve those around me. And when I started really cultivating these practices of looking at my own mind and taking radical responsibility for my own experience and working with the energies of Ayurveda, so eating the food that nourished me, going to bed at the same time every day, getting up at the same time every day, doing things that I'd let go of because I was in, critical mom mode,
right,
I started to get better.
It sounds like you were creating habits. And I know it seems mind-boggling that on any given day, we create and make tens of thousands of decisions. And some of those decisions are habitual, they're automatic, we don't even think about them. But how do you go about changing or adopting habits that will serve you?
So partly, you're right, we do. We make about 35,000 decisions every day. And when we can create automation around the habits that serve us, we reduce those decisions and create more time and energy for fun. So there's two parts of it. Firstly, we have to look at the habits that we want to develop that we know will support us, like exercising every day, like meditating, like eating the right kind of foods, nurturing ourselves, right? And then how can we change the habits that are no longer serving us? And when I look at helping support people with their habit creation and their habit changing, you want to really understand the neuroscience of habits, right? And habits have 3 components, which we often don't really dive into because a lot of the time when we think about habits, we use willpower. And willpower is like a muscle. We have a couple of hours of it a day, max, and it fatigues. And so we use this muscle of willpower to push through, and then the habit changes don't stick. So one of the things that's really key with shifting your habits is understanding that there are 3 components. There's the cue, the thing that triggers the habit. There's the actual behavior itself, the action. And then there's the reward. How does the habit make me feel? And when you start looking at those different components and you recognize that different areas of the brain are involved, you can dive in there and change it more easily.
You make that sound so easy, but I realize that we all have some really good habits. But what I find difficult and what I hear all the time, it's so difficult to break the bad ones. What advice or what have you learned, and what's really the best way about breaking the bad habits?
So one of the key tips about this, Howie, is we have to be willing to face our own lives, right? Which a lot of people don't want to intimately face what they're doing and not doing on a daily, moment-to-moment basis. And that's a big part of creating habits and creating a life that is really fulfilling. And that is facing. So I use an acronym with my clients, which is ACT. You need to analyze your habits, you need to commit to the change, and then you need to track them. And if you can do those three components regularly, you're more likely to have some real traction in changing them. Because we know the statistics from New Year's resolutions. By February, which is what we're recording this podcast in, this month of February, about 92% of people have given up on their New Year's resolutions because they haven't created the structure. They haven't analyzed when they're doing it, why they're doing it, what's cueing the habit, how's it making them feel. They haven't created a system to commit to it. They haven't put it on their calendar. They haven't understood the neuroscience around how long it takes to create a habit. And then they're not tracking it. What makes this habit stick? How can I reward myself to make this habit stick? How can I create accountability? Who else can I recruit to support me?
Tracking is so important. One of the things I always talk about, what's a goal if you don't write it down? It's just a dream. Tracking goals, it's all the same. And you just used a word that's so important, accountability to ourselves and maybe to a partner. And that 92% of the resolutions are gone, which already happened in the middle of February. How would you go about finding the accountability partner that holds your feet to the fire?
So, you can do it with somebody you live with. That's an easy one because you're in each other's faces on a regular basis. That will not work if it's a habit that they don't buy into, though. So if it's a habit that you're trying to change that they don't see the value of, it's going to be much harder, right? So, for example, if you've decided to cut out a particular food group or alcohol because, you're concerned about your behaviors around it, or your doctor has suggested that perhaps you'd feel better if you cut out this food group, and your partner is like, well, hell no, I'm not quitting sugar, or I'm not quitting alcohol, or I'm not quitting gluten or meat or dairy or whatever it is, right? It's much harder to do it. But I always say to people, start with somebody you live with because you're in each other's spaces. So then the other piece around that is, can you create structures that support yourself? So how can you be accountable to yourself? And most of us are visual learners, right? So one of the easiest, cheapest, most efficient ways of being accountable to yourself is to grab one of those calendars that we get through the door to convince us to donate to particular charities at this time of year, stick it up on your refrigerator or next to your bathroom sink, and just give yourself a check next to that habit every day, and you see it like a gold star when you're potty training your 2-year-old. Like, look at me.
Right.
I'm accumulating all of these check marks for exercising every day, meditating every day, drinking my 8 pints of water, doing 5 email reach outs, whatever your goal is, that this habit that you're trying to track.
It is true, though, tracking habits, and you, amongst other people that I really respect in what you're doing, all talk about meditation, proper diet, exercise. How long have you been meditating?
I started meditating in 2008 when I did my first yoga teacher training. And it was required of us as part of our training, and we had to journal about it and report about it and discuss it. And it was really interesting to me initially because I found it really hard to sit still and see my thoughts. And one of my first meditation teachers said to me, meditation is just about becoming friends with yourself. It's about learning about your mind and what it does when you're not constantly filling it. So when I teach meditation, there are 2 key ways that I teach meditation. The first is to improve concentration, which is what most of us think of when we think of meditation, which is just to sit and watch the breath. And when thoughts pop into your mind, you let them go. And what that really does is it gives you that space of learning not to react to the internal dialogue, right? Oh, I can smell coffee. Oh, did I put coffee on the grocery list? Oh, I really want to find a new creamer. And then don't forget the thinking, right? That internal dialogue. And then the external, the dog barking, the dishwasher beeping, the person sitting next to you who clears their throat really noisily. So learning not to react to both of those. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is what I call, or what's called in the Tibetan Buddhist, which is what I'm trained in, analytical, where you are working with particular emotions, particular experiences, particular people. And I have found those to be huge practices, both as a daily intentional practice, because what meditation does, my book details massive benefits, physical and emotional. So reduced blood pressure, PTSD symptoms, telomerase, it lengthens the telomeres at the end of your DNA, which is associated with improved immunity and anti-aging features. But it also just strengthens the connection between your frontal lobe and the amygdala. And, people may have heard of the amygdala hijack and the stress responses that we all find ourselves in. And when we can cultivate these intentional practices of meditation to really dive into modulating the way our brain functions, modulating the way we react. Like, as a kid, your mom might have said, count to 10 before you react, right? So modulating those practices so that you live a more of intentional life and you're calmer in your engagements and you're more thoughtful, particularly in this world of social media, is so key. It really has changed my life, Howie. And I say to all my clients, I just got off the phone with a client this afternoon, teaching her these different ways of meditating because it changes your life.
I hear it time in and time again. So I'm going to take a deep breath. We're going to take a quick break, a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back.
If you're looking for professional and easy-to-access office space in the heart of sunny Fort Lauderdale, Cruiseport Conference Center and Executive Suites has what you need. They offer flexible leasing options, fully furnished and fully serviced offices and conference rooms with high-speed internet access and plenty of free parking. Located just minutes from Fort Lauderdale International Airport, Port of Everglades, and I-95. For more information, you can look them up online at executivemeetings.com or call 1-844-MEETING. That's 1-844-633-8464. And now, back to the show.
So, Tamsin, I was thinking about what you said before the break. How to be nice to ourselves or how to be friends with ourselves. Sometimes it's especially hard in the moment when you do something that didn't go well or didn't go the way you wanted it to go, and we can be so hard on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So you talk a lot about we should not should on ourselves.
Yep.
And the first time we met, we had a great conversation, and I took that away because we should all over ourselves. So where did that come from? And if you could talk about that, I think that is something that we all need to do less of, shoulding on ourselves.
So I first heard that term in a yoga class when a girlfriend of mine was teaching yoga, and she was playing a song from a kind of hippie local band called Wookiee Foot, because they're, obsessed with Wookiee and Star Wars.
Right.
And they had a song about, don't shit on yourself or your friends. It's bad for your health. And I was like, oh, this is such a brilliant concept. It hit me square in the face. I was like, my downward dog. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is such a great term. And I kind of kept it in the back of my mind and played the song a lot and played it as I became a yoga teacher as well. And really thought about that balance that we play between, who we are and who we want to be and what we think we should be, and then what others, tell us that we should based on our gender, our race, our age, where we live, the color of our hair, all of that stuff. when I was doing my executive coaching certification at the Weatherhead School of Management in 2013, I think it was, I started, 2013-14, this concept came up again, but in a slightly different context. And there they talk about the ideal self, the ought self, and the real self. The real self is, I'm a white Caucasian woman, 43 years old. I've got blue eyes. I'm 5'10", right? I'm a mother of 3 kids. These are my real identifying characteristics of who I am, right? Then there is my ought self, which is the should piece. The I ought to weigh this much. I ought to blow my hair dry. I ought to, vacuum up the dog hair more often. I ought to, fill in the blanks, right? And then there's the ideal self. And the ideal self is, what's my legacy? What gets me out of bed in the morning? What am I passionate about? How do I want to change the world? When I think about my life, what do I want to make sure is in my obituary, right? And that's the ideal self. And so often we get stuck in this ought self and this real self, and they kind of peg us in and hone us in and, stop us from really getting out there and being our fabulous selves and changing the world in the way that we can and offering up the stuff that we can offer up into the world.
So I think the way you describe that is so great, but knowing so many people, myself included, we get stuck there. How do you get unstuck? I mean, I understand it. It's easy when you talk about the shunts and where but people get stuck there. I have this vision in my head of a car stuck in mud, and it's spinning its wheels, trying to get out, and it can't. And there comes Tamsin. You're the tow truck driver. How are you getting me or the others that are stuck out of the mud?
So, a couple of different ways. The first way would be that I love this metaphor. This is fantastic. I'm really enjoying this. My tow truck would involve a number of different pieces. It would involve you yourself inside the car and me as the tow truck driver coming in and doing it. And we would need to work together in partnership. So the first thing I would say to you is stop spinning your wheels, right? Which is, when we get stuck, and that, we've all got stuck in the mud in a car at some point, or the snow or whatever, right?
Right.
Stop. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're stuck.
You have to just stop, right? And just and assess, right? So that's kind of like the analyze piece of the way that I help people change their habits. You have to be willing to stop and see where you're at. So what's the situation? Where am I? What's going on? What am I doing? What am I not doing? And a lot of us have not been taught how to do that, right? We just keep going and we keep going and we keep going. And often it's not until we've got a diagnosis, we've got a disease, a marriage has collapsed, we've lost the job, that we realize, oh my goodness, there's been a lot of shoulding going on here, right?
A lot of shoulding.
The first bit, right? So stop. The first bit is you have to stop and you have to assess and you have to see your own internal dialogue here, right? How am I talking to myself? Is this really true? This conversation that I'm creating in my head, is this really true? Am I really stuck? Right? And then the person on the outside, me engaging with you, is going to reflect back at you. Is this really true? What is really going on? What evidence do you have for thinking this way?
Yeah, you just have me thinking now, as the tires are stopping to spin, take a deep breath. And I think the thing that you're saying is we all need to be honest with ourselves. We all need to let that internal voice, how much is noise and how much is honest.
Right. And I think one of the things that's really fascinating to me is, working with people and, having relationships with people all over the world, which I do in my business, and also because I am a traveler. That is my joy and love, is to go travel the world, is learning how to see when you have conversations with people, whether the people you're engaging with are, for want of a better word, on the path. Are they people who are willing to stop, look at themselves, and take ownership for their actions, take ownership for their thoughts, take ownership for the way they're reacting, take ownership for themselves and their own path, versus going, oh, well, the reason I'm here is my ex-wife. The reason I'm here is my boss. The reason I'm here is that person drove into me. The reason I'm here, and when you can make that shift into going, this is my life. This is my one chance. And even if you believe in reincarnation, the likelihood you're going to be born again as a person rather than a mosquito, this is your one shot, dude. Grab it and run with it.
Absolutely. And another thing that you talk about a lot is boundaries. How do you establish boundaries with others? And then how do you set up those boundaries in your own head? I mean, it's one thing to put up a fence on your property to keep people or animals or just anything out. But how do you put up a fence in your head?
So my favorite definition of boundaries is Brene Brown's, which is what feels good. So the first thing about boundaries is really learning to tune into what feels right for you, one, and two, that it can change, that you're not defined by your boundaries forever, right? So that's the first kind of frame I would put around boundaries. The second piece to really think about boundaries is you want a boundary to be something that lets things in and lets things out, right? So you think of like a cell membrane, right? That lets the toxins out and lets the nutrients in, right?
Right.
So you want to have a boundary that's healthy. Another visualization for a sort of healthy boundary is a tennis racket, right? And when all of the pieces of a tennis racket are lined up, the air moves through, you can hit the ball. If the alignment is off, the ball will misfire, right? And you see when you watch Wimbledon, I grew up in London, right? So I grew up watching a lot of Wimbledon. You see them standing there, center court, realigning the pieces of their racket, right? When they've hit a serve at 190 miles an hour, because they know that if those are not aligned well, it's not going to work properly. Or if there's a hole in your tennis racket, the ball's going to fly through it, right? So when you think about boundaries, you want to think about something that's going to let people in, but keep the bad stuff out, right? So one of the biggest ways to access that is your body. Your body has so much information, and we tend to get stuck in our minds a lot of the time and overthink the boundaries, right? And talk ourselves into the boundaries or out of the boundaries, rather than really sinking into. There's a lot of nerves, a lot of hormones, a lot of information stored in the physical body. We talk about like that gut feeling. I just felt like I shouldn't do that, or I felt like I should. I just felt like I shouldn't go down that alleyway as a single woman. I felt like I should pick up the phone. I had that feeling that someone was going to do X, Y, or Z, right? So tuning into the information that our body is giving us, because the body and the mind, even though we like to in the West separate them, are not separate. They're intimately connected. And when we can access that information in our body and allow our minds the space to feel the body and process the information in our body, that can give us a lot of really useful information about how we construct our boundaries.
Which is why exercise, nutrition, and sleep, I keep hearing that over and over. How important is it?
Right. I call them the healthy sex habits. Sleep, eat, exercise.
Sleep, eat, exercise. All right, that's how you're getting your sex. It's pretty good because you look great.
Right, but it is like this all has to work together properly, right? You have to sleep, you have to eat, you have to exercise. And sleep, like we are one of the most sleep-deprived nations on the earth. 70 million people in the U.S. are struggling with some kind of sleep disorder. Nearly half of Americans fall asleep unintentionally every day. Unintentionally. Adult Americans between the ages of 18 and 65, 49% of them fall asleep unintentionally every day. That's a terrifying statistic. We're over-caffeinating. sleep depriving, staying up on our devices and not prioritizing sleep. And, sleep deprivation, is massive in terms of cancer, depression, weight management, and then sex drive and, digestive function. Like, it has so many, memory. I'm like, sleep. You need to get your sleep down, people.
So
the first in my three.
Yeah, when you talk about sleep, and I see it all the time, and as people are getting older, it's less and it's broken. What advice could you? How can people become better sleepers, or what shouldn't they be doing, or what should they be doing from your studies? What better habits should they have?
So one of the difficulties that a lot of people will say around sleep is my schedule is really varied. So if I say to somebody, your schedule is really varied, I'll say, can you do this 3 same things every day before you go to bed? Because what we know from habits is that if you can do things in the same order, one habit will cue the next habit, it'll cue the next habit, it'll cue the next habit. So creating an evening routine is really, really fundamental. Whether your evening is 5 a.m. because you've worked the night shift, whether it's 10 p.m. So doing 3 things in the same order that are soothing and pacifying to the nervous system. So a lot of this stuff is not really
rocket science
or unexpected. It's rocket science. So it's not rocket science, right? Pacify your nervous system. Most people are going to bed with technology. Most people are reading in their bed. Again, no. Bed is for sleep and sex only. When you start associating your bed with all of these energies, eating, studying, watching, texting, reading, thinking, you're disturbing the energy in that space, and you're going to make it much harder to fall asleep.
So picking up 3 things to do, when you think about it, I think you talked about it in your book, or I heard you mention it somewhere about the sand wedge on the way to the bathroom in the morning, trying to create. I think if you could just go through with me, how do you create a new habit? Because it doesn't happen in a day. So your studies have shown you, how long does it take to create a new habit? And you could maybe even talk about that sandwich habit.
Sure. So there's a lot of stuff out there about how long does it really take to create a habit. And because I have a Ph.D. in neuroscience, I'm like, give me the science, not the Instagram, meme on creating a habit. So the science that is most compelling for me about how long it takes to create a habit is a study that NASA did where they put convex goggles on astronauts' faces, on their eyes, so that they could measure their physical, psychological, physiological, emotional disorientation when they went into space. And what they found was that one of the astronauts at 26 days, his world flipped the right way up. So he was wearing these goggles that flipped the world upside down. And at 26 days, his brain rewired and he saw the world the right side up. The rest of the astronauts in that study, their brains flipped between 26 and 30 days too. So these scientists were like, okay, so it takes a month to create a new habit. So then they thought, is it just 30 days total, or does it have to be consecutive? They repeated the study. At 15 days, half the astronauts took their goggles off and then put them back on again. Their brains did not rewire at the end of the 30 days. They required an extra 15 days to rewire. So that to me is very compelling neuroscientific evidence to support the fact that you need to do something every day for 30 days. What trips most people up is that they'll commit to a habit that is really big. Like, I'm going to do a 90-minute yoga class every day. They're stuck in traffic. One of their kids gets sick. Their boss holds them back to a meeting. They don't make it, and they just think, forget about it. Consistency, right? What does that study tell us? You have to do it every day. So if you get home and you can't get to that yoga class, do 10 minutes of yoga on your yoga mat. You're still building that muscle of I'm doing yoga every day, right? From work to home, right? So consistency, reduce it to the ridiculous. Even if it's 1 minute, you're still creating that connection in the brain, that neurological connection, the myelination, the connection between the neurons that this is going to happen. So that's one of the key things. Commit for a minimum of 30 days. It's why you see all these 30-day challenges. Can you go vegan for a month? Can you quit alcohol for a month? Can you quit sugar? Because it takes at least 30 days for the brain to start rewiring. So that's one. When you add a new habit, you want to act, right? You want to analyze the habit, you want to commit to it, you want to track it. So you want to analyze the habit. Like, what does my schedule look like? What kind of day can I do this habit? If you're trying to add a 90-minute yoga class in a 60-minute spot, it's not going to happen, right?
Right.
So analyze the time you have. Analyze what the sort of the bits that'll make the habit sticky. So you think about in the past, I've tried to do this. I've tried to add a habit. What made it work? What made it sticky? Was it having a girlfriend to text every morning on the way to the gym? Was it having my partner remind me to do it? Was it me having the gold stars on the board and checking it off every day? So, look at the things that trigger the habit. Look at what you're getting out of the habit. Look at the structures you're creating around it, right? And that's why the sandwich technique that you mentioned is so useful. So the sandwich technique, again, is tying into the neuroscience. When we have two things that are consecutively associated in the brain, there is a deep neurological connection there. You've probably heard what fires together, wires together, right?
Right.
Coined by Donald Hebb in the 1940s in his book on organizational psychology. And this idea is really, really key. So if you've got two habits that are already associated. So, for example, if you get up every morning and the first thing you do is pee, you put the coffee pot on, let the dog out, right? So say those are the first three things you do in the same order. You want to insert a new habit, you're going to insert it between two of those things that you're already doing. Does that make sense?
I think so, yes. I know that you had mentioned something about exercise where you just said between going to the bathroom and brushing your teeth, put your gym clothes there. So you have to step on them or step over them. And it's things like that can effectuate change.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Here's a good one. How do you break the habit of overthinking and rumination?
You're asking that of a chronic overthinker who's had to work that my whole life.
And I'm a ruminator, so together we make a great couple here.
So, again, meditation is one of the greatest things because when you meditate, you start learning about your mind, right? Remember I said it's about becoming friends with yourself. And when you sit with your mind, what you'll tend to find is, does my mind tend to go to the past and I wish I hadn't said that. I wish I'd responded in that way when that person did that mean thing to me. Oh, I was so much happier when I lived in that city, right? So all of that backward rear view mirror living, right? Or you might sit there and meditate and you go, life will be so much better when I lose 10 pounds. Life will be so much better when I get that job. Life will be so much better when I land that client, and you go to the future. So meditation is a really good tool for cultivating the muscle, cultivating that way of going, oh, wait, I'm in the present moment. What's the point of obsessing about the future and obsessing about the past? So that's a really useful tool for strengthening the overthinking piece, and that's been key for me. Another piece is with the overthinking is maybe it's because it's not clear. Right? Maybe you're overthinking it because you're not sure and you just need to make a decision because a large amount of wasted energy of overthinking goes into should I, shouldn't I, right? That sense of indecision. And indecision is really fatiguing, right? So if you are in a state of overthinking, creating some kind of system where you can decide on a decision, right? So maybe you journal about it. Maybe you talk it through with a friend. Maybe you go for a walk and you record yourself on a voice app.
What if somebody heard what you were saying to yourself?
Who cares? There you are. You're getting caught in the I ought to not sound like I'm a crazy person walking around talking out loud, right?
Right.
Get it out there. Analyze it, and then think, is this something that I can make a decision about, and then let it go?
Would you call rumination the same thing, or is that looked at something differently?
So I can think of rumination as a healthy thing, like a like when you make sauerkraut, right, or yogurt, or fine wine or whiskey, right? It needs some time to process, to come to fruition. And sometimes, it's like my grandmother always used to say, sleep on it and see how you feel in the morning, right? And I feel like rumination has more of that energy because it has a sense of reflection and a sort of component. One of my friends says, I'm going to noodle on it. I say I'm going to ferment it, right? And for me, rumination has that quality of, reflecting and thinking about it and wondering about the outcomes and how does this feel in my gut and how does this feel in my heart. I think when it becomes a defining feature of how you are engaged in the world, like, I don't know if you ever watched the show The Good Place.
I have not watched that.
There's a character in there who goes to hell because he can't make a decision.
I guess when you're faced with that, I've had this visual over the years in my life that, God forbid somebody put a gun to my head and said, make a decision. With a gun there, you're going to make a decision immediately. You're not going to waffle. And I don't know if that's what happens with that character.
Well, I don't want to give it away for people who might be watching the show and, stir up a hornet's nest. But I think the big thing about it is taking a moment to, think about the amount of energy you're putting into not making the decision. And that's really where it comes down to. Because one of the reasons one of the main reasons I do this work, Howie, is I'm trying to help people live their best lives with joy and pleasure and fun and do the work that they were meant to do. And the thing about that kind of ruminating, which to you sounds like it's more of a negative context, but when you get stuck in that overthinking, should I, shouldn't I, did I do the right things, did I not, do I invest in this, do I not invest in it, you're wasting a lot of time and energy, which could be used for other things. So, maybe an analogy that works for you is, your mind is like Manhattan real estate, and it's really valuable. And when you're taking it up with overthinking when you could really make a decision, when you're taking it up with negative thoughts about yourself, when you're taking it up with, reliving experiences that you've had with people or anger about people or confusion about that, you're taking up really valuable mental real estate that you could be using to change the world.
So well put. And to think that people are stuck for decades, 10, 20, 30, 40 years of that noise and affecting the valuable real estate in their head. It's great stuff, Tamsin. I really appreciate all that you're saying, as I can personally relate, as I'm sure our listeners can too, because we all have that inner voice, that inner critic, that noise that gets in the way, the chatter. So I've recently started meditating. So at day 31, am I cured?
I think we're all a work in progress, but I think you'll probably, now you've got this habit set and you want to just keep building on it, right? So what you've done is you've created an intentional practice that you can now then use in a reactive situation. So if you find yourself in a high-stress situation, you can do something to disperse the adrenaline and the cortisol, right? If you're really feeling that in your body, right? You need to go for a walk or a jog or do some yoga or jumping jacks and get the physical energy out. Then you can use that reactive tool of, now I'm going to sit and meditate and notice what comes up in my mind. How am I handling this situation? And you're giving yourself all this great information and taking personal responsibility. So that's brilliant. High five, Howie.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to let you know after 1 year. I'm all about, goal setting and holding myself accountable. And I look forward to really making that a part of my daily life. Is I've had so many amazing guests on, and it's a common theme among everybody is the mindfulness and the practice of meditation. Something,
it really is life-changing, yeah.
Yeah, something else that I know that you talk about is, with goals that you could look through a microscope or you could look through a telescope. Right? How do you feel about that one?
I actually use both of those metaphors in my coaching. So I say you want the telescope of the bigger vision, like the life you're creating, the world you're creating, the direction you're going in, right? And that's the telescope. So getting as specific as you can. And we know from a lot of the neuroscience research that, creating a visual image of that, like a mind movie of the kind of life you want, the kind of world you want. And then you toggle that back to the microscope. Well, what am I doing every day to get there, right? So say one of your visions is, when my youngest kid graduates high school, we're all going to hike up to Machu Picchu together, right? So this is a big vision. Your youngest has flown the nest. You're now an empty nester. Your life is going to change. You want to do this amazing thing as a family. You're all going to hike up Machu Picchu. You look to the microscope and you go, sitting on the sofa, eating donuts, online shopping, watching Netflix. Well, that's not saving money, exercising, eating healthy. None of those things are going to get me to Machu Picchu, right?
No, you're not aligned there.
Right, exactly. So that's why I like the telescope microscope, right? And I use that with my clients. Like, where are you wanting it to go? That's the telescope. And now let's look back on what you're doing here. And one of the things that's going to help keep you on track is your mindset. Your mindset, whether it's the shoulds, the oughts, or other people shitting on you, is the stuff that's going to push you off track, that negative self-talk, right?
Yeah, so like in that example with holding yourself consistent to the hike with your family versus sitting on the couch. Mm-hmm. What happens when people don't have the telescope? They don't know that they want to do the hike, and they're just sitting on the couch. What do you say to those people?
It gets tough. So that's why it's key to changing your life. You need to have a direction, I fundamentally believe, because, I live in Cleveland, and for large chunks of the year, it's really cold and dark and gray and snowy. And
sounds awesome.
To live the life I want, I get up at 5 a.m. and I meditate and I exercise and I journal and I do all of these things before my kids wake up and before my day reacting to the external world starts, right? But, when it's 10 degrees Fahrenheit and there's snow on the ground and my bed is nice and warm, there's part of me that thinks, I'm just going to slap the alarm clock and not get out of bed, right? And if I don't have that connection to, this is the life I'm creating, this is my bigger vision, this is why I'm doing it, these are the people whose lives I want to change, this is how I want to model and show up for my children, these are the impacts I want to have on my clients' lives, I just roll over and slap the alarm, right?
Absolutely. But you don't do that, and that's why you are making such a difference in so many lives. Your work is amazing. I look forward to continuing our relationship because just alone in this interview, I've gotten so much out of it, and I know that our listening audience will as well. Tamsin, I'm going to end this with a few questions just to get you to know you a little bit better. Let me start by saying, and I know you love to travel, is there a place in the world that you want to go and why?
Yes. I want to go to India. Oh, and first, thank you so much. That was such a lovely commentary to end on. Okay, India. I want to go to India because I'm very well trained in yoga and I'm certified in Ayurveda. And both of those came out of India. And I discovered yoga and Ayurveda and all of those sorts of intentional practices after becoming a mother. And I managed to schedule a 2-week trip to India 2 years ago where I was going to study Ayurveda and go and see the Taj Mahal. And the day before I was going to get on the plane, I herniated a disc and I couldn't walk for a month. Oh. So it's like dangling in front of me, Howie. And I want to see it because I really want to experience a place where these things that are fundamental to who I am and how I show up are ingrained in society, and the sort of spiritual connection between the earth and, the goddesses and the mother energies and all of that. I just want to experience that. And I also, having grown up in London, I love Indian food. And I know it's not exactly the same because, everything gets twisted, but I do love vegan Indian food.
I can't wait to go with you. I've taken on vegan now since, I would say I started in November. So love spices. So maybe sometime you could take me for a spicy Indian vegan meal. It sounds great. And I have all the confidence in the world you will be in India sometime soon, and I hope your back is feeling better. Now,
Thank you.
besides your own book, which I loved, what's one book you would recommend?
Ooh, one book. Oh my God, you should see my office. I've got 10,000 books. That's
You could recommend two. You could recommend whatever you feel you want to talk about.
Okay, what books would I recommend? Let me think. I would recommend, I really enjoyed the book Gut, the inside story of our body's most underrated organ, gut, because it feeds into, I love all the nerdy science, because it feeds into this idea that we have this, amazing system that we often ignore and don't pay attention to and don't really understand intimately. And one of the things that is so fascinating to me, for example, about that is serotonin, which is the feel-good hormone. And most of our serotonin is in our gut. But Big Pharma wants you just to take drugs to affect the way that serotonin is processed in the brain. And yes, they can help. But if you look at the gut and you study the gut and all of the stuff that I've been talking about, just like the gut feeling and listening to all of the nerve responses in that, you can really impact how you feel and how you show up. So that's one book that I would recommend if you're interested in thinking about that broader context for how to navigate through the world. And then another book. Oh, my goodness me. This is so hard. This is like trying to get me to choose my favorite child.
No, we wouldn't ask you that one. So don't worry about it. We'll put Gut in the show notes as well as your book.
Okay.
Here's one. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
The best piece of advice I've ever received. Gratitude. My grandmother had a very tough childhood, was abandoned at the age of 11, managed to escape abuse at the age of 17, put herself through nursing school, drove ambulances during World War II, emigrated to Africa, lost her first 6 pregnancies in Africa. My grandmother had massive personal, physical, emotional trauma in her life. But she had this practice of every day, count your blessings, count your blessings, count your blessings. And so she was really my first guru. Guru means somebody who, removes the darkness, the dark to the light, right? The remover of the dark. And she really instituted this practice, which we all now know as gratitude, of just counting your blessings. So looking for the silver lining, looking for that different way of thinking about the world and navigating with a positive attitude, because our brains are designed to keep us safe. And we have this thing called the negativity bias, where we're always scanning the horizon for a predator and looking for what's not working and what didn't work and what's going wrong, rather than moving into that space of, this is what's working, this is what's joyful, this is what's pleasurable, this is the successes I've had.
She sounds amazing. What a life.
She was amazing. Yeah, she was such an extraordinary human being.
Wow. Lucky to have that influence in your life. Now,
I was.
What advice would you give your younger self?
Don't let the others should on you.
Love it, right?
Care less about what other people think, because that can really hold you back. Yeah.
That's great advice. And lastly, I think I'm going to know this answer, but I'll ask you, when you shut it all down and you're not working, what do you love to do?
If I can combine fascinating conversation, reading, travel, music, food, people I love, that's my favorite thing to combine together. So going somewhere fascinating to explore, with interesting food, with live music, with novels to read, conversations to have, and people to hug. life is good.
That sounds amazing. I look forward to seeing you in person and sharing some of that with you. Now, before we end things here, let our audience know, how could they find you or follow you?
My website is tamsinastor.com, T-A-M, the mother S-I-N for Nancy, A-S-T-O-R. And I'm also on LinkedIn a lot and Facebook and Instagram. And you can find my book on Amazon.
Great. We will put all of that in the show notes. Tamsin, again, I can't thank you enough for being here today. The nuggets, the knowledge, the takeaways, and I hope that everybody listening stops shooting all over themselves and follows you on social media, because you're just a world of knowledge, and thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, Howie, and asking me such great questions. I really enjoyed it today.
Thanks for being my toe chuck driver. You're awesome.
I love it. You're welcome.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode of How We Doing It, hit the subscribe button so future episodes are automatically downloaded directly to your device. And if you want access to today's show notes, including links to all the resources mentioned, visit HowieDoinIt.com. That's HowieDoinit.com. Until next time, stay resilient and keep pushing forward.